Hello, everyone, and welcome to your week 2 of Introduction to Psychotherapy. I apologize. I am not here in person today virtually, over on the East Coast with my daughter. So I hope to see you next week at Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So let's talk about Therapeutic Alliance. The goals of the first session. Why do we need Therapeutic Alliance? How should you go about asking your patient what they would like out of care? So we need Therapeutic Alliance because statistically, those who have Therapeutic Alliance with their patients actually do much better. Much better. So you can have two patients and two providers, both prescribe them sertraline 50 milligrams once daily. But the person who has taken the time to get to know their client will have a better outcome. It's shown in so many different research pieces. It's almost belaboring to talk about Therapeutic Alliance. So one of the best ways is just to ask them, what do they want out of care? Like, hey, thank you for coming in to see me. What can I do for you today? Okay. Is it important to measure the buy-in? And if so, how would you do it? So if you have somebody who says they want to be treated for anxiety or depression, and you're like, great, so I think that we should work on nutrition, exercise, diet, sleep schedule, and yes, there's a medication that we can try. And they're like, yeah, I'll do only the medication. Well, all the rest of your treatment plan is kind of out the window. Can you do education? Yes. But if you continue to beat the dead horse about exercise and they're refusing to do exercise, you don't have their buy-in. Patient safety is critical, okay? And if you have good Therapeutic Alliance, your patients will feel better about telling you if they have suicidal ideations. And SI is everywhere, as most of you know. Most of it is passive suicidal ideations. Like, I wonder what would happen if I didn't wake up tomorrow. I wonder what would happen if I drove off the freeway. Do you have any intention of driving off the freeway? No, absolutely not. Okay, that's passive. Versus, yeah, I plan on driving off the freeway today at 5 o'clock on the 5 on the way to Coronado. Okay, that's active suicidal ideations. Passive, you don't have to hospitalize them. Active, right? You have to start building some other safety protocols in there. And safety is critical, okay? Because pills don't teach skills, you're taking the psychotherapy course. But you will not be an expert in psychotherapy by the time it's done. What I hope is that you will learn a little bit about a lot of things. And then you decide what you want to learn more to become a clinical expert at. Okay? We went through some of those last week when we talked about Kohlberg and Roy and Piaget versus Erikson versus Freud. But we're going to talk about more current ones the further along we go. So, the similarities and differences in various screening tools. I love screening tools. I love it. And why? Because it's a point in time. So let's say somebody comes in and they have terrible anxiety disorder, and you're seeing them for the first time, and their GAD is a 21, okay? And you start an intervention. Again, let's pick sertraline again, 50 milligrams. And they're taking it every day, and when you meet with them in 3 weeks or a month, they go, you know, doc, really, it hasn't helped. And you're like, oh, well, have you had any side effects? Nausea, diarrhea, headache? Nope, didn't have any of that. It feels like I'm not taking anything. Okay, and their GAD is still 21. Well, you're probably going to increase that dose, probably double it, right? Versus if you started the sertraline on that same patient and a month later you do the GAD and now it's a 4. Now, is it just the 50 milligrams of sertraline? Probably not. Some of it could be the Therapeutic Alliance we discussed before. Maybe they have a new boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe they had enough of a little bit of a serotonin reuptake inhibitor to help the natural processes which they were already doing, nutrition, exercise. Okay? And so those measures, like the GAD-7 for anxiety, are great tools to use because you know about that moment in time. Do you need a diagnosis to treat? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If somebody comes to you and they're like, yeah, I can't seem to ever relax. I always have a lot of stuff on my mind. I have really poor sleep. Yeah, no, I did fine in school. I could pay attention then. I just haven't been able to pay attention recently. Oh, yeah, I am 48 years old. Yeah, I think I'm in perimenopause. Okay? You don't need a diagnosis to treat. What you would start doing is, well, have you seen an OBGYN? Have you gotten your hormone levels done? Have you thought of HRT, hormone replacement therapy? Maybe you do start them on norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, SNRI, SSNRI, like Effexor, that's also been helpful. So you don't need to diagnose them with major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder or adjustment disorder, whatever. You don't have to diagnose them to treat them, but you do have to diagnose them to bill. So a diagnosis can be helpful, especially to the patient, for instance, with autism or ADHD. And it can also be helpful to the family members, okay? So sometimes it's not too helpful when you're trying to explain to somebody who has borderline personality disorder that they have borderline personality disorder. That is an art form in itself. So the goals of assessment. We're going to effectively engage the patient in the data gathering process, right? And you're going to be doing some of that in your simulated clinical experience. Develop compassion and understanding of the patient. Develop an assessment from which a tentative diagnosis can be made. Collaboratively identify problems and therapeutic goals. Develop a tentative treatment plan. Affect some decrease in the patient's anxiety. Like, oh man, doc, I feel so much better having come in here and talked to you. And really important is to instill hope and ensure the patient will return for the next appointment. Okay, so that's okay. We've done a lot for today. I'm really glad that you came in. I'm looking forward to seeing you in 3 weeks and book that appointment then. Okay, so that's the goals of the assessment. And I should see some of that in your simulated clinical experience, which is due May 7th. And as a reminder, you have already been assigned your partner, and it is in the announcements as well as week 1 recording. So who's this guy here? Okay, you probably know him, Sigmund Freud. He is, in many people's opinion, the father of psychotherapy. He had many thoughts, but one interesting one, which was the basis for many other things, was about defense mechanisms. He believed that in repression, difficult memories were pushed out of the consciousness, but accessible. He believed that by bringing them to the surface and working on them, it's helpful. Though recently that's become more controversial. Like sometimes, hey, just leave that down there. An existentialist would say, let's talk about the present moment. Okay? But Freud, he was all about repression. We kind of talked about this in week 1 when we talked about surface versus deep thoughts. Sigmund Freud's ideas illustrated in the iceberg metaphor. I love this. So we have the conscious, which is immediate awareness. It is, my dog is right outside the door and she is freaking out because she's not in here with me. And then there's the preconscious, the accessible memories, which is, where is her bone? Is her bone in here? It's a memory that I can get to. I can pull it out when I need to, but it's not right there. And then there's the subconscious, what drives you, instincts, repressed traumas, painful emotions. All of these are different levels of awareness according to Freud. And he worked really in the subconscious and preconscious to bring it into the conscious to treat it. Supportive and psychodynamic psychotherapy. What's happened in the past affects today, right? This is what our Freud would say. And our job as a therapist is to explore the relationship. So brief psychodynamic psychotherapy, if you choose to go into this, is not years long like we talked about in week 1. It's very brief. There are termination dates We define events, what caused the problem. We identify resistance. We work through it by observing, clarifying, and interpreting. We support the patient in their progress. And then by understanding our impact on others, we can understand and become better versions of ourselves. Dreams and processing. So Freud would say, and in brief psychodynamic psychotherapy, it is more important to just talk about the dream than it is to interpret it. Okay? I don't have to figure out why in my dream the other night I had beach chairs and I couldn't put it on this beach on this island because all of the beach spots were taken. I don't have to. Just in saying it helps me to vent. So things to consider, this is huge. Transference, countertransference, and resistance. So transference happens when patients' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are associated with early important relationships with caretakers and are felt towards the therapist, right? Like, oh man, you remind me, doc, you remind me so much of my mom. Countertransference is where feelings the therapist has toward the patient involves past significant relationships and includes attitudes, feelings, and thoughts about another person. Like, oh, patient Smith, you remind me a lot of my kid. So it's countertransference. And then resistance. That's seen as a defense that shows the therapist that the patient's anxiety has increased and that defenses are near the surface. They would say that resistance is an opportunity for insight. Again, existentialism. We talked a little bit about it last week. Humanistic, existential, and solution-focused approaches to psychotherapy. So humanism, like way back, 14th century, developed in response to medieval religious ideologies focused on human values instead of the divine. Existentialism emerged as a reaction to rationalism in science. Like, maybe not everything is due to a neurotransmitter that was affected when your dad said this to you when you were 2. Phenomenology is dedicated to descriptive study of consciousness and subjective experience, and all three merged into the humanistic existential movement after World War II. Now, I really wish that this were an interactive course we were teaching right now where I was with you this week, because think about what other factor may have been driving it. What other thing was happening in World War II where they're like, this can't possibly be science and I can't be stuck in the past. I have to be okay right here in the present in order to move on because there is no reason this evil should have happened. Yeah, the Holocaust, right? World War II. So billions of people were killed for no reason that can be rationalized by the human mind. And so existentialism grew out of that. Where am I right now and how can I be better in this moment? So characteristics of humanistic existential psychotherapy: commitment to phenomenological perspective, therapeutic relationship is the key. Remember that therapeutic alliance. Belief in holism, focus on the here and now, emphasis on humanistic and existential themes, and use of experiential techniques. So themes: awareness, authenticity, freedom, choice. We are all responsible for our choices. We have a tendency to try and self-actualize. We have a tendency, just like every single one of you in this class, you are here because you are on the movement to self-actualize. We focus on the process rather than the content of therapy. Excerpt beliefs about patients. I like some of these. We are free to choose how to live and are responsible for the choices that we made. We are resilient in manifesting survival and growth. We are holistic and not reducible to the sum of their parts. This is why we say you are not autistic, you have autism. You are not bipolar, you have bipolar disorder. And this is a change that we've really seen in the past 15 years. Various forms of existentialist therapy. There's person-centered therapy, Gestalt psychotherapy, existential psychotherapy, emotion-focused therapy, and solution-focused therapy. I am a huge fan of Viktor Frankl. So he was a psychiatrist and eventually psychologist who was a concentration camp survivor. His wife and he were taken. He went to multiple concentration camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau and Majdanek. And he would watch how you would have two people who were both in wretched, horrible states. But the one who decided it was time to die, the one who gave up, who had nothing to live for, was the one who died, even though they were both 80 pounds. They both had everything exactly the same horrible treatment, the same poor food rations. So Viktor Frankl is centered in resolving life's existential themes: choice, freedom, responsibility.
What is going on, guys? Today's video is on the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a professor of neurology and psychiatry, and this is probably one of the most powerful books I've ever read. The book chronicles Viktor Frankl's experiences as an Auschwitz concentration camp inmate during World War II. And during his time in camp, he's tortured, he's beaten, he's worked to the brink of death, not given enough food or proper clothing or shoes during freezing temperatures. He's subjected to vermin, frostbitten toes, and edema. He paints a truly horrific existence of his day-to-day camp life. Daily, people drop dead all around him from disease and starvation, and are executed for no reason at all. His mother, father, brother, and wife were all killed in the camps. With all this in mind, how could he find life worth preserving? So let's jump into the first main takeaway from the book, and that is, you have to find meaning in suffering and in your life. As Nietzsche says, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. Even though Frankl was living in extremely difficult circumstances and had been stripped of almost all his humanity, he noticed something. His ability to find meaning in even the direst of circumstances helped him to survive. He noticed two types of prisoners: those that had lost faith, meaning, and hope in the future, and those that didn't. The ones that looked at life as a challenge to be overcome, the ones who had a why to live, were more likely to survive. He discovered that in life, you can either make a victory of your experiences, or you can ignore the challenge and simply fade away. So you have to ask yourself, do you have a strong why in your life? A why strong enough to get you through any challenge? What are you living for? What is your purpose? And I challenge you to sit back and reflect on that and think about that deeply. In Victor's case, he thought of future lectures that he would be giving based on his experiences. In doing so, his current life experiences became more objective. He looked at them as learning events, and he believed, and I quote, "In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning." So to him, suffering became a task that he didn't turn his back on. He embraced it and realized the hidden opportunities for achievement. He had a strong why. So, do you look for the why behind a tough situation, or do you just complain about it? So many of us suffer from existential frustration. In our existence, we're bored, and without meaning, we become frustrated with life. This can cause an array of issues like depression, anxiety, and so on. So Viktor Frankl's take on it was, you have to find meaning in your life. You have to find a purpose, something bigger than yourself. And, searching for your meaning can bring inner tension, and that's just natural and necessary. Struggling to achieve a goal is normal and natural. So really, I challenge you again, sit back, think about what's your purpose, what is your meaning in life. Really take the time to reflect on it. All right, the second big takeaway from this book is that you have a choice. You always have a choice. Between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And in that gap is the ability to choose how you respond to any given situation. There'll always be external forces acting upon you that you can't control, such as the traffic, weather, and so on. What you can control are those internal forces, your response. Never forget that you have the freedom to choose your reaction. It doesn't matter what life throws your way. What matters is how you respond to the situation. It's your attitude towards your existence that makes all the difference. And in the words of Viktor Frankl, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. You and you alone decide what your life will be in the next moment. Man is capable of changing the world and can change himself for the better. You have the freedom to change at any instant. Even in a concentration camp where you have no freedom at all, you can behave like a swine or a saint. Which one depends on decisions, not on conditions. So let's look at an example from the book. A man's wife died and he was depressed, so the doctor asked him, "What if it was your wife that died? She would suffer, no?" He says, "Oh yes, she would." The doctor says, "Okay, then you are the one to take on the suffering instead of her. Isn't that what you would prefer?" The man says, "Yes, of course." So that's an interesting way to look at the suffering. Did the situation change? No. The only thing that changed was the old man's attitude towards the situation. That's a great example of someone finding meaning in suffering by changing how they respond to the circumstance. It's not about your situation, it's about your attitude towards your circumstances. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And there are many more lessons in the book, so I highly recommend you get a copy and you read it. I think it's available online, or you can read my more in-depth summary on my blog. I'll post a link down below. But one more lesson here. Happiness and success cannot be pursued. And I'll quote Viktor Frankl here. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. I want you to listen to what your conscience commands you to do and go on to carry it out to the best of your knowledge. Then you...
Okay, so it's all about finding one's dharma, one's purpose in life. If you haven't read the book or listened to it on Audible, it's a very short book and it's available in, I think, like 63 languages. So it can be very meaningful to you, but also to your patients when you read it. So that's existentialism. All right. Application of theories. Here we go again. So some of the stuff that we've talked about. Dr. Glasser and reality theory and my teenager. I have two teenagers. One's 19 in college and one is 15. She's amazing. Softball player, broadcasting student, does great in school. According to Dr. Glasser, though, when people make poor choices, they're irresponsibility trying to fulfill their needs. Based on this notion, reality theory aims to increase your accountability of your behavior. So in Glasser therapy, we try and change the behavior rather than Freud trying to reason with what it was, right? And so with my teenagers, I try and change their behavior, like clean up after yourselves, do your laundry, make your breakfast. I try and change the behavior so they are not frustrated and anxious, because I know if they change their behavior, then they will be less anxious in the morning trying to get to school. Okay? So how would Gestalt therapy be useful to a school counselor? So school counselors generally don't question teens' opinions, but kind of work in a theatrical dance with them. In Gestalt therapy, you may see them having the client talk to an empty chair, or role play, or make the rounds and go up to people they normally wouldn't and speak to them. So for Gestalt therapy, I would ask my teenager to be me, and I'm her, and I'm super anxious and mad, and I'm being told that I need to hurry so that I'm in school on time. And so we would role play so that she could see how some of the behaviors that she has and some of the feelings that she has may be changed by changing her behavior. So again, Gestalt therapy, very theatrical, super fun, and counselors will use it to try and get other people to like sit a second in their shoes. Bullying, right? Is materialism bad in teenagers? Well, yes and no. It can be bad if they just expect things to come to them. But materialism can be good if it encourages people to work towards their goals and keep on going instead of giving up. Like maybe you're in this program because you know that a Psych NP's average salary is like $150,000 versus $80,000 as an FNP, right? And you want the money to have a better quality of life and to put your kids through college and all of that. Like, yeah, you want to help patients too. I mean, we're nurses. We want to help patients. But maybe you chose Psych NP in particular because of that. Well, with materialism, that's not necessarily a bad thing. My kiddo, Josh, that you saw in week 1 as a graduate, he has autism. So what specific trait is noticeable in people with autism that makes it hard to have good social connections? Well, they're really rigid. And so even though he is so handsome and smart and fun, he only wants to date people from Appalachia. That's it. He wants to date people on the East Coast. He wants to date people who want to live on the East Coast. He doesn't want to talk to people who want to live in California, which is where I am. And so that makes it really hard to date. It's hard to be in a society which requires you to be flexible when how you dress, talk, think, believe, or perseverate on is right. Okay? So, rigidity in any facet of your life makes it harder to actualize it. How do school counselors help to respond in crisis intervention? So we're all talking about teenagers and reality therapy and Gestalt and materialism and all this stuff here. We're on the teenager bandwagon today. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about the trauma itself next week, but start thinking about how we respond in a crisis. Okay? Do school counselors have somebody after, God forbid, a school shooting? Do they have them come into an auditorium for 3 days and sit and replay the trauma again and again while trying to do psychotherapy? No. Crisis intervention is fast. You go in, you try and help keep them together, kind of like a Band-Aid, right? Let them process. But you're not doing a deep dive. You're not going to go all psychoanalytic in the middle of a crisis. So start thinking about that, because we're going to talk a lot about trauma. Wheeler, the book, is really focused on trauma. And so we will have a deep dive into that for at least a couple lectures. So big whoops. Not big whoop, big whoops. I reviewed the recording I just did, and for whatever reason, even though I could see on mine, and you could hear the video, you couldn't see all of the cool animation that happened from the Viktor Frankl video. So if you're really down with watching it, I have included the hyperlink in your PowerPoint. So just copy and paste that. If not, don't worry about it. But Viktor Frankl is incredibly masterful. And this is a cute little 5-minute spiel on it that you can actually watch the animation, which makes a lot more sense with everything that you saw on slide 13. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for reviewing all of this with me. I pride myself on being here for you and available, so feel free, even though I'm traveling, to email me if you have any questions, and I'll respond to you as promptly as possible. If you couldn't tell by now, I'm kind of an existentialist. And in my dharma and the things that I'm looking for in my life, I think education and the pursuit of wisdom is one of that. And so if there's anything that you want to share with me or add to the slides to make this just as meaningful for me as it may be for you, and vice versa, I encourage you to do so. So thank you. Have a wonderful night. And you know which book we're using. Good night, everybody.